I suspect many of you are social entrepreneurs, at least in spirit. You are people who are interested in innovative, sustainable, profitable business strategies that benefit society in general, but especially the poor and the marginalized. Welcome to CIBER Focus and our three-part series on Africa. I'm your host, Brenda Bailey-Hughes, and we have a very special guest with us today. Alexis Suskin-Sperry is an honors student here at the Kelley School of Business. She's a member of the Trockman Microfinance Initiative. Alexis has traveled to Uganda, and perhaps most importantly, Alexis is one of my dearest former students. Alexis, welcome.
Thanks so much, Brenda.
Well, thank you for being here, especially during finals time. It's excellent that you're here. Well, let's start broad. Can you tell us what microfinance is and why it's such an important conversation when we're talking about Africa?
So microfinance in general, most basically is financing for, they call it technically the working poor. So it's for people that otherwise would not be able to access financial services from a normal commercialized bank like you or I might be able to go to, whether it's because of collateral, because it's access to actual physical transportation to these banks, or if it's that they can actually afford to get a loan that's appropriately sized for them. So microfinance is, in its most basic level, very small financing for the working poor.
Give me an example. What do you mean by very small?
All right. An example would be a $10 loan at times. It can be that small. The key to microfinance is that it's not a handout. It's actually financing. It's a loan that has interest. So, and that's why it's become more and more popular, is that it's a profit-driven model. It's financing. So you are able to give this loan to someone, and because of its size, very quick payback time, and that interest sometimes can be, it's a little controversial, sometimes can get a little high, but that loan then it can grow in size and help this person develop their small, tiny business. That loan in the beginning could be capital for the most basic thing. It could be capital for a tailor shop for some sewing materials and some really basic fabric for him to just start his business. Those very beginning pieces of capital. It could be for a mother to buy a cow, that's kind of a bigger one, to be able to start providing milk and selling it in the local village. So there's all different ways that people can use these small loans to be able to build capital and start their own businesses and become micro-entrepreneurs within their communities.
Why Africa? Why did you go there? Why is it a point of such interest for microfinance?
So microfinance originally, the place where it really boomed was where we all heard of it was in Bangladesh, from Muhammad Yunus, who we consider kind of this godfather of microfinance, who brought a lot of attention to it on the global scale because of his Nobel Peace Prize for his work in microfinance and the Grameen Bank, which he founded. So that's where it started. A lot of the attention was in India and Bangladesh, and then more recently in Africa, there's been this growing attention and focus on microfinance organizations and institutions being developed in Africa. And the reason why Africa is such a good place for this is because there is a huge population of working poor, of people who are really trying very hard to get themselves out of poverty. And when I say poverty, it's extreme poverty that I had never seen before growing up in the United States.
Well, okay, so you said you haven't seen that kind of poverty. Can you describe to me what you did see when you were in Uganda?
Well, the majority of the people that I saw, I was living in a homestay in rural Uganda in a place called Uganda, about 2.5 hours outside of the capital. And there were people that were working a lot of different jobs. We're working to here and there, odds and ends, to be able to make ends meet, hand to mouth, really. Most children I saw in the more rural areas had distended bellies they were malnourished. So there was a lot. It was very in your face. It's kind of some issues that you can't ignore. The first time I saw that kind of poverty was also the previous summer. I went to India with the Kelley School's Emerging Markets program and had seen that poverty, but in a juxtaposition, not like I saw in Uganda, with because of this incredible rising middle class in India, you got to see this you'd see the slums going right up against kind of some of the fancier shopping malls I'd ever seen. So this in Africa was different, in Uganda specifically was different because it was entire rural communities living completely off the grid. Running water was, a luxury.
Wow.
It was a definitely completely different world. And that makes it this wonderful opportunity for microfinance. And microfinance is a very overarching term. It covers a lot of things: microcredit, microloans. There's different levels of it. So there can be community-based, so village banking model is what many people call it, that relies exclusively on the trust within a group to provide collateral. So there could be a group, and typically it's women. Women are much more reliable to be paying back their loans. It's really interesting statistically. The vast majority of microfinance clients are women, and they're receiving the loans and much more reliably because they're much more invested in their families and wanting to get themselves out of the cycle of poverty on behalf of their families. It's a really interesting spin to it. So these trust groups are formed oftentimes by women who are all trying to start their own little businesses. One person might be selling matoke, which is kind of the plantain of Uganda, if you will. Another woman might be trying to start up a hair salon or something. So all these little micro entrepreneurs that want together and pool the little bit of money that they have to be able to then give out loans to one another after they've built this trust and relationship. Then that on its most basic level, they're starting to give out loans. That one person comes back with interest and pays back the group. That's one model of microfinance. Then there's microfinance institutions, which are a much bigger level that I saw a lot of in Uganda, where it's an actual bank and you can go, you become a member, you buy a share. There's a lot of different models of microfinance that is being explored right now, and some are working and some aren't.
Interesting.
It's a really interesting thing because of the micro level of it, that it changes depending on the community, depending on the culture. So for instance, like I mentioned, that village banking, that group model that was very, very successful in Bangladesh, where Muhammad Yunus first got started with Grameen Bank. In South Africa, for instance, it really does not. It's not a successful model because of the more individualistic society. Whereas, you look here in the US, when the microfinance firms that have tried to get started in the US, major issue is there's not that really strong community connection for a lot of people to create those trust groups, which are a very, very successful and reliable way of giving out these loans and credits. So it's really, to see all the different models, it varies drastically from one place to another. Even in Uganda, where we were, traveling from one county to another, you would see really some dramatic differences between all of those.
Wow. That's been a theme in this series, is how diverse Africa is. And we've heard country to country, but even county to county, you're saying one model will work and not in another. Bring me back to who benefits from microfinance initiatives. Obviously, the woman buying the cow or starting the hairdressing shop, but who else?
That's a really good question, because there's a lot of different people that benefit from it, and I think that's partly the reason why it's become such a model for people are saying one of the solutions for addressing poverty. Because not only is this woman who's getting that loan to start her own tailor shop, but then her family's benefiting, her children are benefiting, because maybe she'll be able to set a little aside every time now that she's building her business and growing her business for their education. There's one. Hopefully this is going to be invested back in the family, and therefore within the community, to build up the education levels and empower these women and children and families to really get their education and alleviate themselves out of poverty is the end goal. As well, within the community, when you have a much more vibrant local economy, we know that that's a huge benefit to not only that community, but then the surrounding communities. Then if you think of it just kind of traveling up on a global scale, when we have a developing country that has more and more viable, sustainable economies, then you're able to continue out of this cycle that so many of these really impoverished communities have been in. If they have had any experience with lenders, it might have been with, they've gotten these huge lump sums of money that they aren't able to pay back, and they're in this vicious cycle of lending. So microfinance benefits kind of on every different level. And another benefit of it that isn't as obvious is the education that a lot of microfinance organizations provide. There's a lot of the institutions, especially the non-governmental organizations, that it's more of a mission than a profit-driven model for them to provide these financial services. They also provide business training so that entrepreneurs are able to come to them and learn how to grow their business and continue to build up and hopefully eventually graduate out of these microfinance services. So it's really another benefit. Lastly, the one that I think is most powerful, personally, when you're seeing it and experiencing hearing people's stories and seeing these trust circles happen, is the empowerment that comes out for these individuals who maybe never before have been able to pay back a loan, or maybe have never received a loan before, maybe have never been able to buy their own cow. I keep wanting to go back to cow, but maybe not been able to buy their own capital to be able to start their own business and be able to pay that back on their own. So there's this enormous sense of empowerment that happens, and that really it spreads into the community, because then you have leaders, you have some new emerging local leaders, and especially for when I went to Uganda this summer, I worked with an organization for women with disabilities. So you have a marginalized population of people with disabilities that are actually further excluded from this microfinance sometimes, because people don't, the microfinance services, because people don't believe that they can start their own businesses or be entrepreneurs.
So what did your group actually do?
So we worked with this organization to help them develop their own savings and credit cooperative organization, SACCO, which is the term that the form that many microfinance organizations are taking in Uganda right now. And this SACCO was really, we were there only to help support them and support them in setting it up. So it was really at the training level, and because of the model of the program, it's called an asset-based development model, is what we used to apply what we had learned through this program I participated in. And it was really essential that we not be coming in and saying, this is how you run a microfinance organization, this is what your community needs, It was about addressing the community's, realizing the community's assets, and then seeing how we can pull those all together to create something that everybody in the community is invested in, and be able to help them move forward and address issues that they identify. So, for instance, all around them in the community, all these SACCOs are popping up, but it's really difficult for people with disabilities to be able to access those SACCOs.
Can you give me some examples of the assets that you did tap into with this unique population?
Yeah, so assets are, it's a very loose term. So one of the assets was one of the board members on this SACCO, because that's how it's set up, that there were actually board members, 4 different board members, was an incredible presenter. Like, she got up there in front of a group and just blew you away. A lot of times she would be speaking Lusoga, which was the local language, and we would have no clue what she was saying, but we're all like cheering along, we're really into it. And just because she's so charismatic and can really grab a hold of whoever's watching her. She was also a local community leader, so she actually had some political clout within the community, which was a huge asset. There were different assets like Bernard, who was an incredible person. He was actually a tailor, who I think of a lot when I'm using these tailor examples. He was probably one of the most meticulous note takers I had ever seen, and had everything down, documenting everything to make sure that every meeting was really carefully put aside so anybody could go back and know exactly what happened that one day. One of our really huge discoveries when we were kind of going around and asset mapping, is technically what it's called, was a local trainer called Muhammad, and he was incredible. He had helped different SACCOs start up all over the area we were working at, and just had done an incredible job, really, really wonderful, connected with the people. Reminded me a lot of you in a lot of ways, and how he just knew his audience so well, and made sure he would go around and talk to everybody before he actually started his training. So for us, we were really kind of, the goal at the end of the project was to be useless, for us to kind of really not be necessary. Nice. And it was really cool to kind of see us the importance of our presence waning as the summer went on. And currently, I know that they've started accepting members. The members have to buy in with shares and collect a certain amount of savings before they can actually receive loans. But currently, they are running, which is a little scary, but also really incredible and wonderful, and makes me really, really proud for all of those wonderful women participating in it.
You mentioned knowing our audience. I think our audience is interested in microfinance because of who it benefits, and you've kind of set that out for us, the global perspective being eventually we have a stabilized economy in Africa that makes it more possible to do business there than it might be right now. Are there other tips you would give to a business viewer on doing business in Africa, or business opportunities, potential opportunities in Africa? What do you see?
Well, I think it's really important to see Africa as an opportunity, first off, which is really, I think a lot of people see it as this poor, impoverished country that's just, all you can do is charity. Exactly. And the thing that just blows you away is that these entrepreneurs are really incredible people with amazing experience and want so badly to get themselves out of the experience, or the situation they're in when it comes to their finances and it comes to supporting their families, and they want nothing more than to work their absolute hardest to be able to alleviate themselves out of that.
So see it as an opportunity.
It's an incredible opportunity, and gosh, I know you've had geography lessons and stuff, so you know what an incredibly gorgeous place it is to be able to have an excuse to go over there. It's really wonderful. But also, it's a really wonderful. Microfinance, one of the reasons why it's gaining such clout is that it's reaching a population, the sheer volume of the amount of people that it's reaching because of that micro level, again, can end up having some enormous profit. So finding a way to tap into this otherwise ignored population, just because of kind of the realities of communication, for instance, it's really, there's a viable business opportunity there if you can figure out how to tap into that. So I think I would encourage anybody to be able to travel there and see what kind of opportunities they are, but then also understand that microfinance is just one of the pieces to solving this issue of how do you stabilize an economy, how do you help an individual and then a society grow out of some extreme poverty that many of the people I met were facing. And there's so many different elements of it, and this is just one small piece, but it's one that I saw and can attest to that it really is, it can be a very viable option.
Thank you. Microfinance, a very viable option. Thank you, Alexis, so much for being with us today. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Don't forget this is a 3-part series, so you might check out the other 2 segments in our Cyber Focus Africa series.